Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, A Neighborly Dispute. I live in a small Midwestern town where the houses are spread out and the streets are quiet. I always loved the peacefulness of my neighborhood until a new neighbor moved in next door. His name was Jeff and everyone called him A-Hole. He was the type of guy who thought he was better than everyone else and loved to show off his expensive toys, like his lifted truck and motorcycle. It started with him racing down the street and locking his brakes to drift into his driveway. I didn't mind at first, but then he started hitting my mailbox every time he did it. I confronted him, but he denied it and blamed it on delivery drivers. I let it go, but it kept happening. I decided to take matters into my own hands and built a new mailbox out of scrap steel plate and an old railroad track post. I sunk it 4 feet into the ground and disguised it with cedar shingles. I waited for weeks for Jeff to hit it again, but he never did. I had almost forgotten about it until one night I heard a loud crash outside. I ran outside and saw Jeff's truck smashed up against my mailbox. He started yelling at me, saying I had destroyed his truck and he was going to make me pay for it. He even called the cops. When the cop arrived, Jeff tried to play the victim and said I had built the mailbox to destroy his truck. I was nervous, but then the cop asked if I had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained that it had been hit several times in the past year. The cop then issued Jeff 2 tickets for reckless driving and wanton destruction of property. Jeff was furious and threatened to get revenge on me. I was scared, but I didn't think he would actually do anything. I was wrong. A few weeks later, I came home to find my house had been vandalized. The windows were broken, the lawn was torn up, and there was graffiti on the walls. I called the cops, but they couldn't find any evidence. I decided to take matters into my own hands again and set up a camera to catch Jeff in the act. It took a few weeks, but I finally caught him trying to break into my house. I called the cops and they arrested him. Jeff was charged with vandalism and attempted burglary. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail and had to pay for all the damage he had caused. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that justice had been served. I also added a few extra security measures to my home to make sure it never happened again. However, things didn't end there. After Jeff was released from jail, he began to harass me and my family. He would throw rocks at our windows, leave threatening messages on our doorstep, and even follow us when we went out. I tried to ignore it at first, but it just kept getting worse. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do since Jeff hadn't technically broken any laws yet. I felt helpless and scared. I didn't know what to do. One day, as I was leaving for work, I saw Jeff's truck parked outside my house. I tried to drive away, but he blocked me in. He got out of his truck and started walking towards me, holding something in his hand. I didn't know what it was, but it looked sharp. I panicked and hit the gas, driving my car into his truck and knocking him down. I didn't mean to hurt him, but I was so scared and didn't know what else to do. I drove away as fast as I could and called the cops. They arrived quickly and arrested Jeff. It turned out he had a knife in his hand when he approached me. He was charged with attempted assault and harassment. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and had to pay for the damages to my car and his truck. After the incident, I felt a mix of emotions. I was relieved that Jeff was finally behind bars, but I was also traumatized by the whole experience. I began to feel paranoid and anxious all the time, always looking over my shoulder and worrying that Jeff or someone else would come after me. I decided to seek therapy to help me deal with my anxiety and fear. It wasn't easy, but over time I began to feel more like myself again. I also took some self-defense classes and invested in a home security system to make sure my family and I were safe. As for Jeff, I heard through the grapevine that he was released from prison and had moved out of town. I was glad to hear that he was gone, but I still felt uneasy. I knew that I would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if he or someone like him would come after me again. Years went by and I started to feel like I could finally put the whole ordeal behind me. That was until I received a letter in the mail from Jeff. In the letter, he apologized for what he had done and said that he had turned his life around while in prison. He asked for my forgiveness and said that he wanted to make things right. At first, I was skeptical. I didn't know if I could trust him, but something about the letter seemed genuine. I decided to give him a chance and agreed to meet with him in person. When we met, I could see that Jeff was a changed man. He was humble and remorseful, and he seemed genuinely interested in making amends. We talked for hours, and I could feel my anger and fear slowly melting away. In the end, Jeff and I were able to come to an understanding. He agreed to pay for the damages he had caused, and he even helped me fix up my house after the vandalism. We never became best friends, but we were able to coexist peacefully. Update. It's been 10 years since Jeff and I had our falling out, and I'm happy to say that we've both moved on from the experience. Jeff went on to become a successful businessman and even started a charity to help people who were struggling with addiction, which was the root cause of his past behavior. As for me, I'm still living in the same house, but I've made some changes to my lifestyle. I'm more cautious now, and I make sure to always lock my doors and windows. I've also become more active in my community, working with local organizations to make our town a safer and more welcoming place for everyone. Overall, I've learned that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to find common ground and move forward. I'm grateful for the lessons I learned from my experience with Jeff, and I'm proud to say that I've come out stronger on the other side. In my opinion, this story was an intense ride that kept me on the edge of my seat. It's hard to imagine going through something like that with a neighbor, but the author did a great job of making it feel real and believable. The added dramatic ending was unexpected and added an extra layer of excitement. The update at the end was a nice touch, and it was reassuring to hear that the author was able to find closure and move on from the experience. The next story is titled, Neighbor Enjoyed Parking in My Driveway. I Wrapped Her Car in Black Film to Teach Her a Lesson. Living in a densely populated city meant that parking was always a challenge. My neighborhood had limited parking spots, and with 29 houses and 23 parking spots, it was tough to find a spot to park. Some households had driveways, but even then it was frustrating when someone blocked them. My family was a family of 4, and we only had 2 cars between us, which was perfect for our driveway. However, one day, a black car parked in front of our driveway, blocking our access. We thought it was a one-time thing, but the car kept returning every few days, blocking our driveway. We couldn't even pull into our driveway after a long day of being out and about. After several attempts to catch the driver and asking them to stop parking in front of our driveway, I had enough. I decided to take matters into my own hands and teach them a lesson. I wrapped their car in a giant roll of black film that I had in my garage. Although I didn't want to cause any damage to the car, I wanted to send a message loud and clear. The next morning, the driver came knocking on my door, and I was expecting a heated confrontation. However, she was very apologetic and explained that she was trying to sell her old car and didn't have space in front of her house to park. We came to an understanding and she agreed to stop parking in front of our driveway, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I noticed that the same car had parked in front of my neighbor's driveway. I approached my neighbor, and she told me that the same driver had been parking in front of her driveway, blocking her access as well. We decided to work together to solve the issue. We put up a sign that said, "No parking," and we started to monitor the area. We saw the driver approach and park in front of my neighbor's driveway, but this time we were prepared. We walked up to her, explained the situation, and told her to move her car. She seemed embarrassed and promised to never do it again, but that still wasn't the end of it. A few weeks later, I noticed that the same driver had parked in front of another neighbor's driveway. I approached the neighbor, and she was furious. She had missed an important appointment because she couldn't get out of her driveway. Together, we decided to take legal action. We filed a complaint with the city, and they took action. They put up no parking signs on the street, and they started monitoring the area more closely. The driver was fined, and she eventually stopped parking in front of our driveways. Update. It's been a few months since the incident, and we haven't had any issues with parking in front of our driveways. My neighbor and I have become good friends, and we often talk about the time we had to take legal action against the driver who kept parking in front of our driveways. It just goes to show that sometimes you have to take drastic measures to get the results you want. But in the end, it was worth it because we were able to protect our property and keep our driveways accessible. In my opinion, this story really captures the frustration that can come with living in a densely populated city. It's easy to understand why the author would be upset about someone constantly blocking their driveway. While the solution of wrapping the car in plastic may seem extreme, it's understandable why the author felt the need to take action. It's great to see that the situation was ultimately resolved without any long-term animosity between the neighbors. The next story is titled, Overcoming a Car Scam and Fighting for Consumer Rights. Growing up, I never had much interest in cars. I was a typical teenage girl, more focused on hanging out with friends and going to concerts than worrying about the mechanics of my vehicle. But as I got older, I realized that I needed to take care of my car if I wanted it to last. So I started learning more about cars from my dad and brother, both of whom are mechanics. One day I decided to take my car in for an oil change and a free inspection at a local auto shop. I knew my car was in good shape because I had just replaced the air filter and brake pads. But when the mechanic came back with a serious expression and a long list of repairs totaling $1,500, including new brake pads, rotors and calipers, a new serpentine belt, air filter, and compressor, I was taken aback. He even showed me my air filter, which was filled with dirt, dead grass, and a dead wasp. But I knew for a fact that I had just replaced it. Instead of confronting the mechanic right away, I decided to buy myself some time and called my dad to play along. I acted like I was crying and begged for his help while the mechanic stood there smugly, thinking he had me fooled. But my dad was in on the plan and played along perfectly, even asking the mechanic to repeat the list of repairs. Once the mechanic handed me back my phone, I dropped the act and started laughing hysterically. My dad and I were cracking up while the mechanic stood there, red-faced and stuttering. I handed him back the air filter and told him to vacuum it out and let me see it before he put it back in. But as I watched him put the filter back in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, I noticed that my car was making a strange noise. I took it to another auto shop for a second opinion, and the mechanic there told me that the previous mechanic had messed with my car. He showed me how the air filter had been tampered with, and how the mechanic had put in an old, worn-out belt instead of a new one. The second mechanic told me that the original mechanic had probably done this to create more work and make more money off of me. I was outraged. I couldn't believe that someone would do something like that just to make a quick buck. I decided to take action and report the original mechanic to the Better Business Bureau and my state's Attorney General's office. It was a long and arduous process, but I was determined to fight for my rights as a consumer. Months went by, and I thought I had put the incident behind me. But then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the State Attorney General's office informing me that they had taken action against the auto shop and the mechanic who had scammed me. The shop had been fined and the mechanic had lost his license to practice. I was overjoyed. Finally, justice had been served. But I didn't stop there. I decided to use my experience to help others who might be in similar situations. I started a blog about car maintenance and consumer rights, sharing my own story and offering advice to others. My blog quickly gained a following, and I was soon contacted by a local news station who wanted to do a story about my experience. The news story aired on primetime, and the response was overwhelming. Many people reached out to me, sharing their own stories of being scammed by auto mechanics and expressing their gratitude for my willingness to speak out. Some even started their own consumer advocacy groups inspired by my story, and together we started fighting for our rights as consumers. With this newfound sense of purpose, I began attending town hall meetings and speaking with lawmakers about the need for stricter regulations on auto shops and mechanics. I even started volunteering with a local nonprofit organization that helped low-income families with car repairs. But despite all of this progress, I still couldn't shake the feeling of anger and betrayal that I felt toward the original mechanic who had scammed me. So one day I decided to confront him. I went back to the auto shop and demanded to speak with him. At first, he tried to deny that he had done anything wrong, but when I showed him the letter from the Attorney General's office, he broke down and admitted to everything. He told me that he was struggling financially and had made a mistake by trying to scam me. He apologized and begged for my forgiveness. I was torn. Part of me wanted to forgive him, knowing that he was just trying to make ends meet. But another part of me was still angry and hurt by what he had done. In the end, I decided to forgive him, but only after he promised to go through a program to learn how to run an honest business and to never scam anyone again. Years have passed since that fateful day at the auto shop, and I am happy to say that I have continued to fight for consumer rights and to help others avoid being scammed by dishonest mechanics. The nonprofit organization that I volunteer with has grown, and we have been able to help countless families with car repairs. And the auto shop that once scammed me has since changed ownership and has become a reputable and honest business. But the most exciting update came just last week when I received a call from a state senator who had read my blog and wanted me to testify in front of a congressional committee on consumer protection. I eagerly accepted and traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak on behalf of all consumers who have been scammed by dishonest auto mechanics. In the end, my experience taught me the power of speaking out and fighting for what is right. I may have been just one person, but by sharing my story and using my voice, I was able to make a real difference in the lives of others. In my opinion, this story was both inspiring and informative. It's unfortunate that there are mechanics out there who try to take advantage of people who don't know much about cars. But it's heartening to see that there are people like the author who are willing to fight back against injustice. I particularly appreciated how the author used their experience to help others and to advocate for consumer rights. It's always great to see someone turn a negative experience into a positive outcome. The last story is titled, Confronting My Neighbor's Ongoing Harassment. When I first moved into my house, I was thrilled. Finally, I had my own space, my own backyard, and my own dog, a young and energetic husky named Luna. But as soon as I began settling in, I noticed that my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was not happy about my presence. She would always give me nasty looks, and I overheard her complaining to other neighbors about the noise Luna would make. But it didn't stop there. One day I found a note taped to my door, telling me to keep my dog quiet or else. Then, a few days later, I woke up to find a bag of dog food on my front porch, along with instructions on how to feed my dog. I found it strange, but I figured Mrs. Thompson just wanted to help. However, things only got worse from there. On several occasions, I found Luna loose in my backyard with the gate open. I suspected Mrs. Thompson had let her out, but I had no proof. Then, I caught her feeding my dog on my own property without my permission. I was furious, and I decided enough was enough. I decided to confront her. I gathered all the evidence I had and marched across the street to her house. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, I said, "Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you about your ongoing harassment of me and my dog." She looked at me, feigning innocence. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." I knew she was lying. I took a deep breath and continued. "I have pictures and evidence of the notes, the dog food, the trespassing, and the times you've let my dog out." She stared at me for a moment and then sighed. "Okay, fine, I've been upset about the noise, but I never intended to hurt your dog. I was just trying to help." I shook my head. "I appreciate your concern, but your actions are not helping. My dog is healthy, and I've consulted with my vet about her care. You need to stop." She nodded, and we parted ways. For a while, things seemed to be okay. Luna was no longer getting out, and I didn't see Mrs. Thompson as much. But then, one day, I came home to find a citation on my door from Animal Control. They had received a report of animal neglect and had come to investigate. I was furious. I called them right away, and after presenting them with Luna's vet records and a statement from my neighbors, they agreed that there was no neglect. But I knew it was Mrs. Thompson who had called them. I decided to confront her once again. This time, I was not as calm. I marched across the street, banging on her door until she answered. I showed her the citation, and she feigned ignorance. I didn't call them, I swear. But I didn't believe her. I told her she needed to stop, or I would take legal action. And then, to my surprise, she broke down in tears. She revealed to me that she had recently lost her own dog, and that seeing Luna reminded her of her loss. She apologized for her behavior and promised to leave us alone. After that, things improved significantly. I no longer felt like I was being watched all the time, and Luna was happy to play in the yard without any disturbances. However, several months later, Mrs. Thompson passed away from natural causes. It was a shock to us all, but I felt a sense of relief that the ongoing conflict had finally come to an end. Update. After Mrs. Thompson passed away, her son reached out to me to offer his condolences. We had never spoken before, and I was surprised by his kindness. He told me that his mother had been going through a tough time before her death, and that she had been struggling to cope with her loss. I felt a pang of guilt for being so harsh with her, knowing now that she was just in pain. But then he surprised me even more. He told me that his mother had left something for me in her will. I was shocked and a little uneasy. I didn't want to benefit from her death, but I decided to hear him out. He told me that his mother had left a letter, apologizing for her behavior and asking for my forgiveness. She also left me a small sum of money, which she had set aside for the care of my dog. She had included a note telling me to take Luna on a trip and to enjoy our time together. I was moved by her gesture and felt a sense of closure. I realized that Mrs. Thompson had not been a villain, but a lonely woman who was struggling to cope with her grief. I decided to honor her memory by taking Luna on a trip to a nearby state park. It was a beautiful day, and Luna had the time of her life, running and playing in the sun. As we drove back home, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the unexpected gift that Mrs. Thompson had left us. I had learned a valuable lesson about compassion and forgiveness, and I had been reminded of the healing power of kindness. From that day on, I made an effort to be more understanding and patient with my neighbors, and to always approach conflicts with an open mind. Another update. It's been a year since Mrs. Thompson's passing, and I still think about her from time to time. Her son has moved away, and the house next door has new tenants. Luna is still my faithful companion, and we often take trips to the park to enjoy the outdoors. I've made peace with the past, and I'm grateful for the lessons that it has taught me. In my opinion, this story was a great reminder that conflicts with neighbors can often be resolved through communication and understanding. It's easy to jump to conclusions and assume the worst about people, but it's important to remember that everyone has their own struggles and challenges. I was touched by Mrs. Thompson's gesture, and it made me think about how we can all make a difference in someone's life, even in small ways. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.